There are decisions we make in the heat of the moment, under the shadow of fatigue, that seem insignificant. An extra minute, a final glance. But for Clara Hayes, 40 years ago, that single minute was not just the breaking of a rule. It was the exact moment a man's fate, hanging by a thread, was rewritten forever. She never expected that an ended shift could become the dividing line between life and oblivion. This is the story of the nurse who stayed and saved a life, but carried the secret of that sacrifice for 4 silent decades. Clara Hayes, 76, now lived the slow, delightful pace of Tarrytown, New York. Her home, nestled near the Hudson, always smelled of fresh coffee and the faint dust of old books. She was the epitome of the community's respected lady, a helpful neighbor, a dedicated gardener, always with a smile that didn't quite reach her deep blue eyes. Clara's life was structured by comfortable routines, the morning paper on the porch, Sunday Mass, the quiet evenings. But beneath this surface of retired peace, there was a silent ache, a small question mark she had pushed to the back of her mind for nearly half a century. She might be surrounded by grandchildren and friends, yet the weight of that one year, 1983, kept her isolated in a private chamber of her memory. The senior audience appreciated her modesty, her composure. They understood the effort required to maintain a facade of serenity after a lifetime of service. They could sense that somewhere in that immaculate past, there was a fracture. Clara remembered the sound of beeping heart monitors and the antiseptic smell of the ICU as if it were yesterday, sensory details that tethered her to an untold oath. She was a hero without an audience, and the burden of her virtue was heavy. The first crack in the wall of her peace came on a gray October afternoon. While tidying a forgotten box of hospital belongings, Clara found a rusted name tag and a small, faded sticker that read, St. Jude's, 1983 Survivor Reunion. The tag wasn't hers. It belonged to a young paramedic she barely remembered. But the mention of the reunion hit her like an electric shock. St. Jude's, the city hospital where she had worked in the trauma ward, was being demolished to make way for a new complex, and they were holding one last ceremony for veterans and survivors. The simple act of holding that sticker brought back the acute memory of Ethan. Ethan, the 22-year-old, brought in after a late-night motorcycle accident, whose chance of survival was statistically 0. The attending doctor had signed the DNR, do not resuscitate, and the team was preparing for the transfer to the palliative care ward. But Clara, that night, felt something more. An impulse, almost a silent command. She could have gone home. Her shift had ended 30 minutes earlier, and her 5-year-old daughter was waiting for her, sick. But passing by Ethan, something in the grayish color of his skin and an almost imperceptible micromovement on his arterial monitor made Clara stop. The found object, this sticker, was not just a reminder of an old hospital. It was the key to the locked room of her greatest regret and her greatest pride. The return of the memory was physical. The pressure in her chest, the smell of ozone from a stormy night in 1983. Clara allowed herself a gentle flashback, letting her mind drift back to the cold corridor of St. Jude's. She had just received a devastating telegram about her mother's condition in Ohio and needed to catch an emergency flight the next day. Her focus was split, her mind exhausted. When Ethan was brought in, he was a bloody phantom. Dr. Albright, a tired, cynical surgeon, gave the diagnosis: massive, likely terminal brain injury. There's nothing we can do, Hayes. Proceed with the transfer paperwork, he ordered, leaving. But Clara saw that the vital signs, though minimal, were strangely stable, even after the initial crash. She knew the rule was to follow the doctor's order. But she also remembered an anatomy lecture about an experimental oxygenation technique that could, perhaps, reduce brain swelling if applied immediately before deterioration. No one else was looking. Clara's pain was twofold: the pain of risking her career and potentially her license by disobeying a direct order, and the pain of knowing that by staying to fight for Ethan, she missed her mother's final phone call that very night. The guilt of choosing a stranger over family haunted her more than any professional reprimand. This was the burden, a man's life for a lost goodbye. She sat in the armchair, silent tears tracing paths as she relived the sound of that tiny beep of hope on Ethan's monitor, the sound that kept her from going home, Clara felt an overwhelming need to mend history. But how? She tried the modern approach, internet research. She typed, Ethan motorcycle accident, St. Jude's, 1983. Hundreds of results. She tried to convince herself it was better to leave the past alone. He doesn't even know who saved him, Clara. Don't disturb the peace. Her inner voice whispered. Her first attempt at connection failed. She found an obituary for a man named Ethan Davies and felt a terrible relief, thinking the story had been resolved by death, and she was free of the secret. But then she noticed the date, 2015. Not the same man. The attempted denial failed. The search continued. She tried to connect with a community of former St. Jude's nurses, sending a vague email about old friendships, hoping someone would mention the 1983 ICU miracle, but no one took the bait. Her attempts at reparation were cautious, almost fearful, because what she truly dreaded was not reprimand, but Ethan's disdain for her choice to sacrifice family for him. She tried to talk to her daughter, Sarah, about the burden of career versus family choices, but Sarah, who only knew the retired, gentle mother, couldn't grasp the depth of the sacrifice. "It was just an extra shift, Mom," Sarah said, unaware that that extra shift cost Clara the chance to say goodbye to her own mother. Clara's failed attempts only amplified the emotional weight, making the secret denser and heavier. The reunion date approached, and Clara was on the verge of emotional collapse. She had booked the ticket, but on the morning of the event, she tore it into small pieces. She couldn't go. She didn't deserve recognition. How could she look at Ethan, if he were alive, and not feel the crushing guilt of having missed her mother's last breath? The emotional valley hit its lowest point on a rainy afternoon. Clara was cleaning the attic when she found the condolence card her father had sent her in 1983, following her mother's death. "You were always a better nurse than a daughter." A cold sentence written on the edge read. That phrase, unfair and cruel, had been the truth she had carried. In that moment, she realized her greatest fear wasn't what others thought of her decision to stay. It was that her father was right. She had chosen her vocation, her mission to save lives, over her family obligations. She sat amidst the attic dust, feeling alone, flawed, and misunderstood. The weight of the past suffocated her. She lost hope for self-reconciliation. She had saved a life forever, but in return, she had permanently broken something within herself. Clara's dark night of the soul was the realization that, even as a heroine, she had punished herself for 40 years for not being perfect in every role. The inner turning point came from an unexpected source. That same afternoon, a gentle knock on the door. It was the postman, delivering a bulky box. It wasn't from a hospital, but from Dr. Albright, the cynical surgeon from 1983, who had recently passed away. The box contained his belongings, including his shift journal. Inside, there was a folded page. Albright had written about the night of Ethan's accident, calling it the miracle. He recorded, "Hayes stayed. She knew I was wrong. She performed the secondary procedure, a foolish risk, and saved the boy's life. I almost reported her, but I couldn't, because she was right. That act of disobedience was the purest act of service I have ever seen." More importantly, there was a note about Clara's mother. Hayes lost her mother. She chose this stranger's life. History will never know what it cost her. I am the only one who does. I called her back to the ward that night, so she could catch the call, but it was too late. I failed her. The seed of redemption blossomed. Clara was not the cause of her mother's loss. Albright had tried, and fate had prevailed, but he recognized her. Her sacrifice had not been invisible. What had kept her in the shadow for 4 decades was the perception that her sacrifice had been in vain. Now she knew it was worth it. The decision was made. She needed to see Ethan, not to be forgiven, but to complete the circle that began that fateful night. Clara drove to the reunion venue the next day, her heart beating with a rhythm she hadn't felt since 1983. The event was small, but heavy with history. There was an exhibition area dedicated to great saves. And there he was, Ethan. No longer a bloody phantom, but a robust 62-year-old man, laughing with his 2 children and his wife. He was a retired history teacher, dedicated to his family. Clara hesitated, but the memory of Albright's words propelled her. She approached. "Ethan," she asked, her voice barely audible. He turned, and their eyes met, a moment suspended in time. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" Clara simply gestured toward the faded photo of him from 1983, which showed a young man in a coma. "My name is Clara Hayes. I was your nurse at St. Jude's." Ethan froze. He knew the story. He knew Dr. Albright had issued DNR orders, but he never knew who rebelled. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice thick. "You stayed after your shift. My parents told me an anonymous nurse interceded, did something no one else would. Because of that, I met my wife, raised my children, taught thousands of students. You gave me everything." The moment required no words, just pure, human emotion. Ethan, a man who rarely cried, bowed his head and hugged her. A 4-decade embrace. Forgiveness was not needed, only gratitude and recognition. The truth had been revealed. It was not a lost sacrifice, but an entire family tree that bloomed thanks to 1 minute of duty. Ethan's embrace was more than gratitude. It was the closure Clara needed, seeing the full life she had enabled. The weight of having missed her mother's goodbye finally dissipated. She understood that the sacrifice was not the loss, but the seed of a legacy. That week, Clara called her daughter Sarah and, for the first time, told the full story. Sarah, now an adult and a mother herself, understood the magnitude of her mother's choice. She didn't condemn her, but admired her deeply. "Mom, you always taught us about the importance of duty. You lived it." Clara Hayes spent the following years volunteering in a mentorship program for young nurses. She taught them more than technique. She taught them about the silence of intuition and the courage to disobey orders when the heart and the oath demanded more. Clara's life became sweeter, more peaceful. She had a new grandson, whom Ethan, the history teacher, insisted on meeting. The life lesson was clear, and it resonated with the senior audience who understood the time and cost of duty. True greatness is not found in grand applause, but in small acts of invisible courage, done when no one is watching. For sometimes, an extra minute is what truly defines a life forever. The story of Clara and Ethan reminds us that life's journey is made of invisible bridges, built by quiet courage. If this story of redemption and the power of a single act of kindness has touched your heart, and if you believe that our purpose often manifests in the most unexpected moments, please let us know. Click the like button so more stories about the true human soul can find their way to you. If you've ever lived a moment where intuition trumped the rule, share your memory in the comments below. And if you value narratives that celebrate kindness and hope, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Together, let's continue to honor those who make a difference, even silently. Your support helps us find and tell these essential stories that remind us what truly matters.